We're on lesson 6, studying the Good Samaritan. And one of my homework assignments was to you to find where it says that the Samaritan was good. Did anybody find that? Michael's laughing. It's a trick question, isn't it? I thought about, it's interesting. This week, or actually since I've been doing this study, if I watch TV or any movies or whatever, it's amazing how much a Good Samaritan is referenced in society. Good Samaritan, and so forth. So it's interesting. Even someone doesn't study the Bible, even someone who doesn't believe in God, would understand the connotation of what a Good Samaritan does. So pay attention to that next time you watch shows or movies or anyone talking about doing something good. They always refer to a Good Samaritan. But in these verses, Good Samaritan is not actually there. Now it's in usually your Bible will have these headers, right? The parable of the Good Samaritan. But that's something that we have come up with. Now, I'm not saying he's a bad Samaritan. That's not what it means. But Jesus is wanting to, really, I think, I'm kind of jumping to my summary, which will be in August, but the idea that we should not look at the Samaritan as good, bad, or whatever, but as something ordinary, expected, you see. This is what everyone should be doing. It's something everyone should be doing and not bragging about, because doing good is something that we all should be doing. Okay. Last time we went over verses 25 through 29, and so now we're going to jump into really the meat of it, which will be 30 through 35, and we're going to go over 36, 37 the next time that I stand before you. So let's read the text, and then we'll come back and review it. Jesus replied, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he fell among robbers who stripped him and beat him and departed, leaving him half dead. Now by chance a priest was going down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. So likewise a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he journeyed, came to where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion. He went to him and bound up his wounds, pouring oil and wine." For some of you that may be oil, but for some it's oil and wine. "Then he set him on his animal and brought him to an inn and took care of him. And in the next day he took 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper, saying, 'Take care of him, and whatever more you spend, I will repay you when I come back.'" So this is the English Standard Version, by the way. Now, let's examine the players. Let's see, Jesus has given us this parable. Let's see who we are dealing with here. We have a man traveling, robbers, a priest, a Levite, a Samaritan, and an innkeeper. Now, Jesus no doubt chose these individuals, these people, for particular purpose. These are just not randomly selected. So we'll study that and see what each one of these has a significance to. Now, there's another animate player in this story that I didn't list because I didn't think the animal would be that significant, but we just never know sometimes. Now, just to kind of review, we want to understand why Jesus is talking about this. Let's go back to the lawyer's question. Remember, he said, "But he desiring to justify himself." He's already quoted Deuteronomy 6:5 and Leviticus 19:18, and he asked Jesus, "Who is my neighbor?" Now, Jesus doesn't answer the question directly, right? he goes into the parable. And so the lawyer, you see, he's expecting Jesus to identify who his neighbor is in this story. So let's look at the verses and see if we can pull some words out and try to understand each one. This is the exegesis part. It's kind of the more academic part. I didn't want to do it. Lewis insisted on doing it. Is that right, Lewis? Okay. Some of the things I wanted to point out here is this. Jesus says he replied. Now, you notice it doesn't say said, and that's because in the Greek they use this word hupalambano. Hupalambano means to take up. Hupa is usually used as a prefix for under, preposition for under. Here, used with lambano, means to take up. In other words, Jesus took up the challenge, you see. He's not just going to answer, but he's going to emphatically describe who a neighbor is. Almost Jesus is, if we can say, excited that he's able to teach this lawyer who a neighbor is. If you read Josephus, he talks about what we want to talk to next. Let's go to the next slide. So here, mainly here, I just wanted to point out about replied, that it was not just answered, but more emphatic, that Jesus was really excited about doing this. All right, verse 30. Jesus, here we go. And by chance, a priest was going down that road. Okay, sorry, I'm just a little confused here. Okay, it didn't change 30 to 31. There it is. Michael, I needed another highlighter code right there, didn't I? What's for error or caution warning? Okay. All right, so now by chance a priest was going down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. Wait a minute. Okay, here we go. So he fell among robbers. Okay, this is what I wanted to point out. I'm sorry. This word here for robbers is listasis. And this robber I wanted to point out is really more like bandit. It has the force of a violent thief, okay, a criminal in some sense. And this word is also used when Jesus is on the cross and there's two thieves on the cross. It's actually this word. So the thieves we think about are violent thieves, okay? And so here too, the force of these are bad dudes, right? These are very violent robbers. They didn't just go up and rob the guy, but they beat him. They and then took his possessions. And says that they stripped him and beat him, okay? One thing that popped in my mind, and this is a crazy thought that we always have, is I wonder if one of these is the criminal that could be on the cross with Jesus. What? Well, I don't know. I'm just saying. Okay. Verse 30. Now, by chance, a priest was going down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. Now, some of the things here is when it says this saw that and first of all, you know, we don't know exactly, okay, why did Jesus choose a priest, a Levite? We know probably why he chose a Samaritan. We'll get into that. Levite priests, we can guess that they were the most looked up to, the ones who should have known the law, right? What's the difference between a priest and a Levite? All priests were Levites, but not all Levites were priests, probably. But I think Jesus wants to tell this story like those that should have known better. You see, this is the way that they're acting. It says it saw, and this is the Greek word harao, which means they didn't just see him with their eyes. That's blepo. But they saw them, they knew the condition. You see, they saw with the mind's eye. When they saw this man on the side there, they knew his condition. They won't have anything to do with it. They knew he was naked. They knew he was beaten. They knew he was left for half dead. And they don't have anything to do with it. They understood the situation. This same word is used in Luke 15 where you have the prodigal son. We see where the son is coming up and the father sees the son. Okay, well, it doesn't mean he saw him with his eyes. It means when he saw the son, he understood the condition, you see, in his mind. He understood, but when his son was returning, he's returning because he's broke, he's destitute, he's desperate. It's his only option. He saw all of that within his son coming to him. It says here that they passed by this anaparikamo. That didn't sound right. Antiparekamai. That sounds just as frightening, doesn't it? But anyway, so this word here means come, and this is anti, which would mean against. So he passed by on the other side. He intentionally, you see, moved to the other side. Didn't want to have anything to do with this guy. Probably just glanced at him, understood his condition, didn't want to have anything to do with him. Okay, so this is the priest. Now, so likewise a Levite, when he came to that place, he saw him and passed by on the other side. This uses the same Greek words. The Levite knew the condition, knew the situation, wanted to avoid it, okay? And, we understand we could be in that situation too, whatever situation if there's a scuffle somewhere, used to be, remember the good old days where people used to go Christmas and try to take their toys for their daughters and sons, and it turned into a madhouse. Remember those good old days? Well, we would try to avoid those situations, right? So the priest, Levite, see this situation. Now, here's something kind of interesting. The Levite and priest we know are Jews. We know the Samaritan is a Samaritan. What ethnic group is the man who's been robbed? We don't know. And Jesus does that on purpose, I think, because the only way they would know what ethnicity he is if they saw the clothes he was wearing. Okay? If we see someone from another country that comes and visits or looks at their outfits, sometimes we can guess where they're from or something like that. But here, Jesus does this on purpose. He strips the man of all his clothing. He's probably covered in blood. Now, they probably all look alike as far as skin color and whatever. But we don't know what he is, okay? And that's important too here, because if the Levites and the priests knew it was a Jew, you see, they'd probably go help him. But that's the point of the story. It's just a man that needs help. He's half dead, okay? Half dead. By the way, that's actually a Greek word, is half dead, is actually a word. We use it as a kind of an idiom, right? I knew a man one time, he said, I'm going to live to be 120. I said, well, how do you know that? And he says, well, I'm 60 and I feel half dead. Okay, moving right along. But 33, but a Samaritan, you see, as he journeyed, came to where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion. Okay, already we see the contradiction here, the difference in here. Something in Greek construction is, this word Samaritan is the first word in the sentence. Usually, a preposition starts a Greek sentence. Well, so what? Well, what that means is that Jesus is emphasizing a Samaritan of all people, okay? As he was journeying, making his way in the same direction, came to where he was, and he saw him. This is the same Greek word, saw, harao. The Samaritan does just like the Levite and the priest, you see. He sees the condition. He understands what's happened to this poor man who's naked, who was robbed, beat, half dead, but he had compassion. This word compassion means deeply moved, very sympathetic. In Mark chapter 1, there's a situation where Jesus is cleansing, healing. I think it's in Galilee. I'm not really sure, to be honest. And he says, let us go to the other towns and preach, for that's the reason why I've come. Okay, he does that, but then it's like right after that, in about verse 40, 41, a leper comes up and says, Jesus, will you heal me? Well, Jesus has just said that's not why he came. He didn't come here to heal. He came here to preach about the kingdom. But then the verse says, but Jesus had compassion and he healed the leper. And that same word is here. Jesus had compassion and the Samaritan had compassion as well. And he went to him and bound up his wounds, pouring oil and wine. Then he set him on his own animal and brought him to an inn to take care of him. Now, before this, he approached the man. Something happened that made the Samaritan approach the man. Compassion, right? That compassion is what motivated him to go and help the man. All right, let's see here. Now, this word is a different Greek word. It's proekomai, not the antiparekomai. Okay, well, what's different? Well, this word here is a very forceful approaching. Almost, I don't want to put words in Jesus' mouth, or Luke ran to the man, hurried to the man, because he had this compassion that caused him to go to him, excuse me, quickly. And you see here, this is the difference. You see these letters, and these letters are both the same. Ekromai means to come, but there are different usage here. Okay, bound up his wounds is the Greek word trauma. Trauma, that's what we use. Okay, when someone is in trauma in the hospital, it's pretty bad, isn't it? Right, when there's a big 10-car pile up or something happens, and we've seen all those movies where they go to the trauma center, okay? And so it has, the Greek has the plural, which indicates that not only did he have a lot of wounds, but they were severe, okay? And that's why we can say that the man was half dead, okay? That's not figurative, that's literal. He was on his deathbed, okay? Trauma. Trauma, not drama. Drama is something else. Okay, let's see here, verse 35. And the next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper, saying, take care of him. Whatever more you spend, I will repay when I come back. Now, notice this has the next day. So, the Samaritan, we think about this happening like this. The Samaritan, I think, one had to bound up, take care of the man. Maybe he couldn't be moved immediately. Maybe he had to take care of him right there in this his own Samaritan trauma center. Maybe he put him on the animal and it took several hours to get there, okay? And they had to stop and rest and so forth. I think the point here is that the Samaritan took care of the man. The Samaritan put time, effort, love, compassion into trying to help this man. He spent money on the man, okay? Denarion, I have here, was about a day's wage, okay? 36 cents, okay? Luckily, minimum wage is not this anymore. I think first job I had, I made $3.35, okay? So, I don't know, Mark, you probably made about, what, $1.50? Yeah, he was lucky, right? Cash. All right, but that's think about a day's wage. So he spent 2 days' wages, okay, on this man. Doesn't know him, but the driving force that Jesus wants to emphasize here is compassion. Compassion. Okay. Now, I don't know. Here we might get in the more boring part of the lesson. Just to be honest with you, that's my own assessment. What I want us to do now, let's time out. Let's think about where we're at, because the goal of this lesson is to try to understand what Luke is trying to do when he's writing about Jesus, okay? Now, what I want to emphasize here is that if you read Luke 10, 9 and 10, all this, see, this is Jesus traveling from city to city. Forget about these chapters. Forget about the verses. Okay, these were added later in the 1100 ADs. This is all connected here. Okay, we've already talked about when Jesus sent out the 72, when they came back, gave what they said. He talked about all this is all going to be connected here to tell this story. All of this is going to be about the kingdom of God, okay, as we go through here. Now, and I've told you in the last couple lessons that what I would like to do, and as I learn here, as I study here and go through this, is try to figure out how did the first century audience receive this information that Jesus is giving? What was their mindset? Because Jesus is trying to tell these Jews, you have to change the way you think about God. Okay? And so here's what we got. We got the Gospels and the New Testament, and we want to look at it and try to see and figure out what were they thinking when Jesus was telling his story. And this will tell us, as we go through this lesson, why Jesus chose a Samaritan. Okay? So, as I've learned this, I want to learn you something. Okay? Now, what we want to study, I think time will allow us. If I shoot that with the laser, would it slow it down, Michael? People say, don't do that. Okay. We're going to look at we're going to see what Samaritans are viewed upon in the New Testament, the Old Testament, our good friend Josephus, some rabbinic literature, and then just some other combobulated ideas that I had. All right, let's look at the New Testament. This is in the sense that what are some other ways Samaritans are mentioned in the New Testament that can kind of help us why they were thinking what they were thinking. Now, the first one is one we didn't study, but is really close. You see, if you look at Luke 10, where we're at, this is Luke 9:51 through 56, and this is where it's categorized as the Samaritan village rejects Jesus, okay? And I'm not going to do a thorough exegesis of this. I heard an amen. Who said that? Okay, but we're going to just look at this and see. When the days drew near for him to be taken up, he set his face to go to Jerusalem. Now, this is not a idiom. This is actually what it says. The Greek uses the word prosupon, which means face, to Jerusalem. Literally, face to Jerusalem. And he sent messengers ahead of him who went and entered a village of the Samaritans to make preparations for him. But the people did not receive him because his face was set towards Jerusalem. Now, that's a red flag for us. That's a question when we read this and we don't know much about it. We should ask, why were the Samaritans upset that Jesus' attention traveling was towards Jerusalem? 54, verse 54. When the disciples James and John saw it, they said, Lord. Now remember, they've rejected him. They didn't receive him. Now the question is, what does that mean? Probably Jesus sent them ahead to prepare for lodging, food, maybe find a good sermon spot, find a good place where I can preach the gospel, okay? But they didn't receive him. They didn't want to have anything to do with Jesus. When the disciples, okay, and so the disciples, when they rejected, they said, Lord, do you want us to tell fire to come down from heaven and consume them? Some of your versions may say, as Elijah did, which is okay because this is actually what they're referencing. But he turned and rebuked them, and they went on to another village. Now, I want to say a few things about this. Now, there's no doubt here that there's a comparison between this event and 2 Kings 1, okay, where Elijah stops some pagan people from going to the pagan temple. And I'm kind of just summarizing for time's sake. But the comparison also works well when you study this between James and John, the messengers, and Elijah, okay? In the sense that Elijah stops the men from preaching at the pagan shrine, and in essence, the messengers are stopped in Samaria from going to Jerusalem. In both instances, God's permission is asked. Elijah says this phrase. He said, if I am a man of God, let fire come down from heaven. In other words, that's a permission structure, okay? God, if you're with me, then send fire down if it's your will, okay? Here too in Luke, they ask, Lord, do you want us to tell fire to come down? Okay, so there's a permission structure here. In 2 Kings, the fire actually does come down and consumes the pagan people. But here, the fire is denied, okay? Luke rebukes them. What are you thinking? They've rejected us, they've rejected the gospel, they've rejected this, and you want to kill them, okay? Well, some of the things to think about here is that when the gospel was rejected by the Jews, you see, the disciples didn't say, well, let's just kill them with fire from heaven, okay? So it tells us that they had a low thinking about Samaritan. They reject the gospel, let's just burn them up. They've rejected you, Jesus, let's burn them up. Jesus rebukes them. That's not the way we're going to do things. Of course, this being so close, you see, again, when I was trying to say that all this is connected, when the disciples hear this story about the Good Samaritan, you see, now they have a better understanding of what Jesus was trying to teach them earlier. Okay, here's another one. John 8:48. Again, I'm not going deeply in this, but just want to mention these so that we can get a good sense of how, again, the Jews thought about the Samaritans in the first century. The Jews answered him, and this is where basically, I like to call this section like where Jesus says, I am, from the beginning and so forth in Abraham. And when he says this about this, the Jews respond, are we not right saying that you are a Samaritan and have a demon? Okay, it's what we call in the biblical world a double whammy. First, they're accusing him of not being a Jew. You say, you're a Samaritan. That's what they're accusing him of being. You're not a Jew. And two, you have a demon, you're not of God. Okay, so they try to rebuke him in two ways and try to insult him in two ways of doing that. Now, it's interesting if you read the next verse. Jesus says, I'm paraphrasing here, basically, no, I'm not of the devil and so forth. But he doesn't say, no, I'm not a Samaritan. Okay, that he totally doesn't even consider. In other words, To Jesus, that's not an insult, you see. They think it's an insult, but to Jesus it probably, well, I'd say it's not an insult, okay? But the demon part he does respond to. John 4, this is the, we always say this, I think it's kind of interesting. We refer John 4 as the woman at the well. Well, it's actually probably more accurate to say the Samaritan woman at the well, right? But I have a long, I've taught this before, a long section, even longer than Luke 10, so we don't want to go there. But we do want to highlight a few things. Verse 9, the Samaritan woman says, how is it that you, being a Jew, ask a drink from me, a woman of Samaria? For Jews have no dealings with Samaritans. Okay? Now, a couple of things there is the Samaritans generally didn't think of themselves as Jews, but they did think of themselves as Israelites. They did think of themselves as Hebrews, but not Jews, because Samaritan, the word Samaritan, actually the word Jew, is more of a geographic thing. Jews are called Jews because they live in the area of Judea, Judea, okay? That sort of thing. So she's actually acknowledging there's a difference. You're a Jew, I'm a Samaritan, okay? For Jews have no dealings with Samaritans, okay? This Greek word here basically means not to associate on friendly terms, okay? Again, what were they thinking in the first century? We don't like Samaritans. Samaritans don't like Jews, okay? And so there, we could say racial, because in some sense, and we'll study some of the Samaritans had almost the same idea about Jews as Jews did Samaritans, okay? But we have the perspective of the Jewish side of it, which is going to be more than enough to gather enough information on this. Okay, how is it that Jews, and she makes this kind of broad statement, Jews have no dealings with Samaritans. In verse 20, she makes this point, our fathers worshipped on this mountain, but you say that in Jerusalem is the place where people ought to worship. See, this is a great story because event here, because it gives a really, really good details of the split between Samaritans and Jews. She said, you Jews say that we need to worship in Jerusalem. Now, when she says our fathers worshipped on this mountain, she's talking about Mount Gerizim, which is where they're located. They're in Samaria, and we'll get into here about Mount Gerizim. In Jerusalem, and the Greek word place is topos, okay, where we get our word topography, okay, topos, the place, and it has this ha here, which means the, it's emphatic. We worship on this mountain, but you say in Jerusalem is the place, okay, where people ought to worship. This ought is the Greek word day, and this day is the same word that Jesus uses to tell Saul in Acts 9, go to Damascus, you will be told what you must do, what you ought to do. Necessary, no negotiation. Philippian jailer in Acts 6 says, what must I do to be saved? Okay? So she says that people must worship. The Jews were telling the Samaritans the whole time, you're so wrong. You have to worship in Jerusalem. Okay? And and the Samaritans had different ideas regarding that. Now, later in John chapter 4, if you remember, the disciples come back. They've gone to get provisions. They come back. And it says that they marveled. They thumazo. They marveled at Jesus for a couple of things. One, he's just talking to a woman. And two, now you could talk to women, but you had to have other people there. A man just didn't talk to a woman out by themselves, okay? But the main point is she was a Samaritan. So they were amazed. They marveled. Now, why is that important? This Greek word thumazo is the word that's used in the New Testament when someone witnesses a miracle. It says when Jesus walked on water, they say, "Who is this?" Because they marveled someone could do this. So my point being that when the disciples come back and Jesus is talking to the Samaritan woman, they think it's a miracle. Like, what in the world just happened? Okay, that's how special this was. Now, if you guys want to interrupt with questions or comments or just ask if you can leave, I'll give you permission. Okay, let's look at some Samaritan usage in the Old Testament, which is not a whole lot, but this is possibly why we have the start of this problem, right? This is 2 Kings 17 when the Assyrians come in, they attack Israel, which is in the north, and they start getting these different ethnic groups from Babylon, Cutha, Hava, Muth, Hophma, and Sephar, I don't know how to pronounce these terms, and placed them in the cities of Samaria instead of the people of Israel, and they took possession of Samaria and lived in its cities. So what happened was when the Assyrians took over, they started bringing in all these people. They all started mixing. They started marrying. They started using their foreign gods, you see, and they really polluted, in the Jews' sense, their ethnic heritage, their bloodline, okay? Later, Nehemiah and Ezra is going to come and just really get on to them. Speaking of Nehemiah, so here's Nehemiah 2:10, where it says, Sanballat, the Horonite, the Tobiah, the Ammonite, served. Now this is where Nehemiah comes back. He's going to restore the wall. But they don't want him doing that. They don't want him to restore the wall and so forth. And it says here's kind of, you can see this, how the Assyrians were bringing people into this area from just all these places. They believe that Sanballat was from Haran here, which can also be Sanballat the Haranite as well. Well, later we read where Sanballat heard that they were building the wall. He was angry, greatly enraged. He jeered at the Jews. He said in the presence of his brother and the army of Samaria, "What are these feeble Jews doing? Will they restore it for themselves? Will they sacrifice? Will they finish up the day? Will they revive the stones out of the heap of rubbish and burn the ones at that?" Now, at first glance, you think, well, he's a troublemaker, okay? Now, I want to give a different perspective and say, if this Samaritan really believes that the Jews are worshiping on the wrong mountain, you see, because he mentions about, are they going to sacrifice on the wrong mountain? Then he could have been legitimately concerned about what was going on here. Now my time's run out very quickly, so I'm decided, let's get into Josephus just a little. Josephus was writing later in the 1st century. He was a Jew. He fought against the Romans. He made peace with the Romans, became a Roman citizen, became a slave. He took his slave owner's name, and then he wrote a lot of stuff. One of them is the Antiquity of the Jews. He wrote a lot of history. So he basically talks about 2 Kings, and he says, for that is the name of which they've been called by this time, because they were brought out of the country called Cutha, which is the country of Persia, showed you that map, where there was a river in the same name. Each of them, according to their nations, were number 5, brought in their own gods in Samaria, see, and worshiped them, and was a custom of their own country. So Josephus is kind of given a history. This is why those Samaritans are really bad. Okay? This is why they're really bad. Because not only did they intermix with these strange pagan people, but they worshiped their gods, and they adopted it as their own idea, right? In Josephus' one section, he basically calls which you can tell, it's kind of very biased, right? He's very anti-Samaritan. He calls them hypocrites. This is Antiquities 11:8-6. It says, when Alexander the Great approached Samaria, he asked them about their ethnicity. They said they were Hebrews. Remember I told you they don't think they're Jews, but they think they're Hebrews, the original Israelites before the split and so forth in 1 Kings 17. Later, Alexander gets more specific, and he asked them whether they were Jews, and they said they were not Jews. Now, this is where Josephus says they're hypocrites, because they say when it suits their needs, they say, yeah, we're Jews. But when it doesn't, they say, no, we're not Jews. That's what he tells the Samaritans. Now, again, Josephus is exaggerating a lot in this. He's, making, I won't say making it up, but he's just exaggerating this idea. Josephus says, as the Jews were celebrating the Feast of Unleavened Bread, he gives this instance, which we were called the Passover. It was customary for the priests to open the gates after midnight, when therefore the gates were first opened. Some of the Samaritans came privately into Jerusalem, threw about dead men's body and the closure, on which the account of the Jews afterwards excluded them out of the temple. So he said there was this one instance, these troublemakers are Samaritans. They came in, through dead bodies, desecrated the temple. They did this. They don't like Jews. They're rotten scoundrels. And that's just what I'm going to write about them. In 11:4-9, he says, but the Samaritans, being evil and enviously deposed to the Jews, wrought many mischief. When the Samaritans saw the Jews under these sufferings, they no longer confessed that they were their kindred, nor that the temple on Mount Gerizim belonged to Almighty God. This was according to their nature, as we have already shown. Now this is when the Greeks controlled the area, Antiochus IV, Epiphanes, and Joseph makes the claim that the temple on Mount Gerizim that they had dedicated to God, they decide really to dedicate to Antiochus, and they called him a god. You see, he's really, really down on these Samaritans. Now, what I'll do is I'll stop there, and the next time we'll go over are the other details that will just add more information, because I want you to understand why in the first century the Samaritans had a bad reputation, and why Jesus' message is so important when talking about the gospel. Thank you.